Hello and welcome to this episode of Business on the Wire. As the nation enters phase 3 of a lockdown, there are bigger and deeper concerns about what's happening with the economy and how indeed economic activity can be restarted. To discuss that and what seems to be sorely lacking in terms of policy going ahead on the economic front are two gentlemen, Ajay Shankar, who was Secretary DIPP. In fact, he was also part of the core team of the 2008 stimulus package for India, and Prem Shankar Jha, renowned economist and writer. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for joining in. Mr. Jha, let me start with you with an interesting comment made earlier today by the Chief Economic Advisor in response to the question about a financial stimulus package, something everyone has been waiting for. And I quote, "One of the first things anybody learns in economics is that there's no free lunch. If you're going to monetize the deficit, it will have some impact on macro fundamentals. We can't pretend to do policy as if there are no costs." In an environment where the country seems to be starved and waiting for stimulus part 2, does this sit at odds with what the reality is in terms of what the system needs?
Well, there is no free lunch is a very easy thing to say. But if that was so, then why were there so many free lunches during the Great Depression? I mean, it was Keynes's idea of pump priming, which is taken up, and the countries that took it up actually got out of the depression fast. When there's a sharp drop in demand, if you wish to sustain the economy, you need to pump money into it. So in fact, that is not a question of free lunch. What you're doing is you're sustaining the lunches that you were getting and which will disappear if you do not in fact put in that money. So to me, this is probably the most asinine remark I've ever heard. I'm sorry to say such a word about the Chief Economic Advisor. I mean, he should know this. And I don't see why in what context he made this remark. I'm sure that it could also have been a sort of a light-hearted remark. I hope so, but I think it needs to be taken up.
Mr. Shankar, let me draw you into this conversation because you're someone who was part of the team that put together the global financial package or the financial package from the global stress in 2008. What are the lessons to draw from there? And if I may extend that point, the problem at this juncture is that India is not where it was in 2008. We're actually coming off from 7 quarters of a slowdown, so the situation was quite bad in any case.
The first thing about the 2008 stimulus package, which I think is worth going public about, is that the economy was in a free fall. And we didn't expect to be hit by what happened in the US, but we were hit badly and we were in a free fall. So when we got together, we did not think of the fiscal deficit. In fact, somebody from the IMF came down to Delhi to tell us to go in for a fiscal stimulus. And all of G20 decided to go in for a fiscal stimulus. And we thought not of the fiscal deficit. We didn't think of numbers of how much percentage of GDP we would use. We thought of how to generate demand in the short run so that the free fall of the economy could be arrested and economic growth would return to normalcy. And the surprising part of the experience was that within 2 quarters, we were able to get the economy back on. And the entire thinking was, would this measure generate demand in the next quarter or the next quarter? We didn't think beyond 2 quarters. And we went into a lot of micro details and we did a lot of stakeholder consultation with all segments of the economy to see where demand could be generated in 1 quarter or 2 quarters. And the 4% of the increase in fiscal deficit which occurred as a computation ex ante. So after the packages were out, it turned out about 4%. Now, the problem of the memory about this episode is that everybody presumes that the stimulus was too large and it created the subsequent problems. Now, the fact of the matter is that by the 3rd quarter of the financial year of 2009, we were already growing well. So that was the time to start looking at the fiscal deficit and winding it down. For whatever reasons, the leadership in the finance ministry then did not do it. But that does not mean that the stimulus was too large and created the subsequent problems. So I think that's one starting point. The other is that given the current crisis, and this crisis is far worse than 2008, in fact, the worst in global memory of economic management. I think the starting point should be, what is it that we need to do now? What is it that we can do 2-3 months later, 6 months later? And the first bit of the doing now was done in the package announced by Finance Minister with the assurance that no one would go hungry. A lot of people are saying that more needs to be done and hopefully more will be done. But so that is unavoidable. But the other part, and which I'm so glad Prem has pointed out very strongly, that if you do nothing, the collapse in revenues would be such that the fiscal deficit will go through the roof. And you may end up having no option but to monetize it. Because your revenues disappear if the economy is not functioning, then you will get neither GST revenues nor import duty revenues nor tax revenues except from salaried employees. So to save the fiscal deficit from going through the roof, it is necessary to act now, and I would argue that it would be the best possible investment that the government would make today. The next question would be, how do I design the measures to stimulate the economy, given the fact that on the battle against the virus, the easing of the lockdown is taking place in such a manner that it has to be controlled, calibrated. And today it is very difficult to say when the supply chains would be restored and when the economy has a fair chance of getting back into normalcy. And as you rightly pointed out, the normalcy itself was a bit of a slowdown when we were hit by the crisis. So my take would be that we start thinking of the stimulus or the relief measures as a way of reducing the fall in the fiscal deficit. We think of it of how to get people who are unemployed, who all get their incomes out of daily incomes, either as wage earners or casual laborers, back into the workforce. And how do we minimize the pain and then going forward, get back to good growth?
Sure.
Can I just...
And the last point I would like to make is that monetizing the deficit is a theoretical option down the road. You may well find that the liquidity with the banks may be enough to take you out of the woods. But you should be mentally prepared that you will monetize it to the extent necessary. You will not go to the IMF and you will do it on a self-reliant way. And my final point is that at the height of the world wars, the deficits in some of these countries was over 24-25%. And the present US deficit is 10% of GDP.
Mr. Jha, I want to bring you back in this conversation, but I also want to add a couple of data points to, our conversation. India's April services PMI, just today came in at 5.4 from 49.3. I don't think we've seen that number ever on our PMI. Ditto for the auto sales, which have come in at 0 for many of the auto companies. How does that sit with the argument that you were just making about the fact that macro fundamentals do not exist at this point and have to be defended from the get-go?
No, the macro fundamentals are collapsing around us. But the way to restore them is not the way that Mr. Subramanian was suggesting, when he says that there is no free lunch. What Ajay said is exactly what we need. We need to pump a very large amount of money in. I want to give you some figures of what's happening now. The fundamental thing that everyone talks about when they say the macro fundamentals must be kept here. This is the pure monetarist approach, neoliberal monetarist approach to economics today, which dominates the whole world, but which is absolute disaster for the developing countries. It means basically that your fiscal deficit must be controlled. Your domestic, your budget must be such that your fiscal deficit does not go out of control. Which means that if you want to spend more, you must borrow, which is what the Reserve Bank is trying to do. Now, to do that, the Reserve Bank reduced interest rates. They brought down the repo rate on March 27 to 4%. And at that point in time, the Reserve Bank of India governor told the banks, the commercial banks, look, you must take this money and you must lend it. We will not let you. We don't want you to park it back at a lower rate and the reverse repo rate, in the Reserve Bank itself. And he said, there's about 300,000 crores that you have parked out here. We do not want any more of that to happen. Well, let me give you the figure today of the amount of money that is now parked there. It is 840,000 crores. The commercial banks would love to be able to lend. They've got a wonderful, the lowest interest repo rate they've ever had. They're offering loans at 7.25%, which has not been seen for 10 years. And they're getting nobody to take it. They're not getting anybody to take it because no one is able to borrow anything. They don't think, there is no demand in the economy. Therefore, they don't know whether they'll be able to sell. 840,000 crores. This is not a joke. 840,000 crores is 42% of our entire GDP. Now, that is something that we have to bear in mind. Why is this happening? I would like, I don't want to talk at length because I'd like to hear Ajay, but let me just finish this point now. Let me give you a few items, talking about macro fundamentals. The second thing that one should be looking at is the external funding, external balance. What we are afraid of, and this government is afraid of, is that if you start spending now, the credit ratings agencies will say, oh God, these people have no control over their spending, and therefore we are going to downgrade their investment rate. In which case foreign exchange will flow out of the country, and then it will make it very difficult for us to meet our yearly payments on the very large foreign exchange external commercial borrowings that we already have, which is about $450 billion. Now, the truth of the matter is the exact opposite. That if you do not keep your economy together, if you don't have an external balance, right, then the money will run anyway. And what is happening to us just now? At this moment, we have got we are bringing back our workers. So $30 to $40 billion worth of remittances will get lost. The exports have gone down by 34%, which is actually $100 billion. That means we're down $140 billion. And the only thing that's saving us is that the oil prices have fallen from something. The moment the oil prices go up, and they could go up from one week to the next, as you know, we will be in such a serious external deficit crisis that money will in any case rush out from here. So what is Mr. Subramaniam talking about macro fundamentals? One last point, Ajay, I'd love to hear you more. But one last point, we're talking about, the real problem. Why is nobody taking any money from the Reserve Bank today, borrowing? Because they know they can't sell. What has been done by this lockdown is that the figures are here from the CMIE has just given them. 114 million people have lost their jobs. 114 million people. 91 million people are daily wage earners. 18 million salary earners have lost their jobs. Now, I made a quick calculation. This is a minimum fall of demand, domestic demand, of 90,000 crores a month. A month. So what is going to happen to your budget? Your excise revenues have fallen. Delhi said that in March, the excise revenues fell by 91%. The income tax is going to give you nothing this time. The corporate tax is going to give you nothing. These three taxes are 2/3 the total budget of the country. So your fiscal deficit will shoot through the roof. You need this data. Mr. Subramaniam needs to look at this data carefully before he makes remarks like this. The external balance is being smashed. The domestic balance is in an even worse condition. And the only way to protect the economy today is to spend money so that the purchasing power goes back up again. And the way to do that is to make sure that everybody who had a job continues to get, say, 2/3 of the income that they were earning, so that they can continue. Thank you.
Mr. Shankar, I want to draw you into this again, but I want to shift the focus from the institution to the individual. What some of the corporates tell me privately is that they're actually open to borrowing because they're so afraid of what the situation might be in the next couple of quarters. There is also a point of view from economists saying timing of stimulus is important, because if it doesn't come in at the right point, you could tilt the balance from surviving to completely collapsing. Where do you think we are at this point? Because we've been waiting for that stimulus part two, and how badly do you think some of industry could get impacted if it doesn't come in the next few weeks?
If it doesn't come within the next few weeks, then we are looking at really heavy negative growth this year. That is the fall in GDP rather than low growth. And we are looking at a very, very large number of bankruptcies across the spectrum. So the time to act is right now, because the economy is being opened up in phases in a calibrated manner for actual activity, but that activity will not happen unless an enterprise sees demand and it sees its supply chain back in action so that it can meet demand. So I would argue for the following. First of all, I think the FRBM should be kept in abeyance, formal decision, till situation comes to normal, maybe till the next financial year. Similarly, the IBC should be kept in abeyance till the next financial year. So if there is no FRBM and there is no fear of IBC, then I think some confidence may come back. Then I would say that through SIDBI, you give to the MSME sector a 100% increase in working capital, which is guaranteed by SIDBI, so that the banks can give 100% extra working capital so that they can survive and restart work. Because right now, whatever working capital they may have had would have been practically drawn down or exhausted. So 100% increase. Now, ideally, this working capital should be for 2-3 months interest free, and the government should pick up the interest burden. But again, government would take the view that, okay, the credit is guaranteed, take the loans from the banks at these low rates of interest, and we take a call 1 year down the road. And that's another way of acting. Though a much better way would be that for 3 months we will bear the interest cost. It's easily affordable, it's not very large. Then for the whole economy, the key is to look at generating demand right now, as I had said in my earlier intervention. So here are a couple of thoughts which are a series of many which you could think along these lines. So roughly, if you look at the abandoned housing projects in the economy, where the finance minister announced a 25,000 crore package last year to get the incomplete buildings completed. Now you could actually go farther and say that we will take over all the incomplete projects, put some czar in place, we will bully the banks into giving all the money that is needed, we'll guarantee those loans, and get work restarted on all these projects in the next 3 months, sort out all the contractual issues and target completion by next June to October. Now that's a huge stimulus for many things, from cement, steel, paint, electrical fittings, furniture. Then you could move on the environmental front and say that we've seen clean air today in Delhi after ages, and we are all delighted. And why? Because the cars are off the road. So you could say that, okay, once the stimulus package would go like this, that anybody who replaces BS 1, 2, 3, 4 cars by trading it in, and that old car goes to a scrappage yard and is scrapped. So something like what the Germans call the cash for clunkers scheme in the 2008 stimulus package. You create demand for BS 6 cars and trucks and 3-wheelers and 4-wheelers. And what you do is give a cash rebate of, say, 50% of the GST. So it's a 10% reduction in price. So you create demand somewhere where there's again a huge backward linkage, and then the firms get into business. And then the banks have to see which kind of firms we will lend to, give them working capital at lower rates of interest and things like that. But a lot of micro level thinking and detailing is required. And I think it's pointless to spend too much time if you're taking a decision on whether I can afford a 10% GDP fiscal deficit or 5%, or what the rating agencies do. Mm-hmm. And on rating agencies, I genuinely believe that we should follow the Prime Minister's dictum of looking at some self-reliance. So we should forget the rating agency, forget about borrowing from the IMF, look at managing our economy and the macroeconomic fundamentals in such a way that we do not need external debt. And I personally believe, and through some rough arithmetic, I believe there are foreign exchange reserves are adequate to take care of any needs in the next 6 to 8 months. And if need be, we can also see how we can restrict imports. I remember 6, 7 years back, Mr. Chidambaram had made import of gold impossible. So you can see a series of instruments whereby we are able to be a little more self-reliant and not worry about rating agencies and foreign borrowings and capital leaving our stock market. In fact, I mean, I'm one of those who believes that part of the downturn has been due to the 19% appreciation in the real exchange rate in this decade because of excessive capital inflows. So actually, if many would argue that the rupee goes down to 80, it would increase the case for value addition in India, it would lower imports from China and create more jobs in India. So I think we have to start thinking very differently than the way we've been thinking for the last 15, 20 years. Okay.
There's one, Mithali?
Yes, Mr. Jha.
Yeah, there's one point that I want to sort of elaborate on here, where I don't disagree with Ajay, but I have a different, I come from a different angle to agree with him, which is this, that actually this idea that the credit rating agencies will downgrade us and everyone will start running. I think that we both put too much emphasis, importance attached to what they say, and secondly, they're also not quite as big fools as they I want you to remember that in the early 2000s and in the late 1990s, our credit rating was junk, actually. And yet, the foreign investment poured into India because the fundamentals, we had liberalized and everything was pro-industry at that time. And the interest rates, the government attitude, finances, etc., special economic zones were being set up and so on. And so they came in, and they came with large sums of money, not to speculate upon the Indian economy and to buy up shares and sell them or buy companies that were going broke. But in order to invest, we need that kind of long-term foreign capital to try and protect in India's foreign exchange situation by bringing in short-term capital, which is looking for 1/4 or 1/10 of 1% interest advantages by coming to your country is a recipe for absolute disaster. So I think that is a completely wrong idea. The other thing is that I think we need to have a simpler way of getting to the people so that they can start working again. They don't lose hope. You know, there are 50 million units in the small and medium, micro, small and medium enterprise sector, employing 110 million workers. Now, they are so small. Actually, the government can't go down to them on a one-on-one basis and say, we'll do this for you, do that for you. I think we really need to go and deal with the employers directly. As Ajay said, one of the things that you can do actually is to give them free access to working capital. There's another one, which is true also of larger companies. Look, when they are not working, and they've not been working for 2 months now, you're still incurring fixed costs. In the case of shops, it's rent. In the case of enterprises, it is the capital they've invested, fixed capital invested, and the debt servicing cost, which is interest plus amortization that they have to pay. That continues. Now we've done a little bit of relief by giving moratoria and so on, but moratoria are not enough. What you need to do is you need to actually say, look, in the period that there is the lockdown, we will meet these costs for you. And behind this, there's got to be a totally different philosophy. Look, the lockdown was imposed because of a pandemic. It's a natural disaster. It's like a tsunami. Did we ask people to pay the people we rescued from the tsunami? I mean, if there's a cyclone in Andhra or Orissa coast, National Disaster Management Agency goes in there straight away. The government funds it. Okay, it's a small thing, but it's the same idea. You got to fund people because you are destroying their lives in one area in order to save some of their lives in another area. But they haven't done anything to deserve this. So you have a moral obligation to them to keep them in a condition where they can get back to work the moment that this COVID crisis is over. And to do that, you have to keep paying the workers a part of their salaries, and you've got to keep meeting the employer's fixed costs while they're not working. Now, these are precisely the things that are being done abroad. But we first don't look at what others are doing. Secondly, we believe that we know everything basically, and we don't.
Mr. Shankar, there's two parts to this. One, of course, is building your own house or rebuilding your own house, and the other is looking outward. There were some comments early into this pandemic saying this is India's opportunity, moment in the sun to become, a core competitor to China. Unfortunately, the economic lockdown hasn't helped matters. Now, even as we emerge, we're emerging in phases and blocks and zones, even as smaller countries like Vietnam, for instance, never actually shut down economic activity. Do you think, as someone who's been part of the DIPP, we still stand a chance in terms of our competitive advantage, or do you think right now things are in too much of a mess?
I think it is a time to try and create competitive advantage because we don't have it today. And we are honest with ourselves, we should recognize that over the last 10 years, labor-intensive manufacturing has been slowly moving out of China. None of those jobs have come. They've gone to all our Southeast Asian neighbors. And why? And the reason why goes into two fundamentals on which we don't pay enough attention. One is that we are very happy to say we have more than enough land and we have enough land. But land should have infrastructure of a quality which is competitive. We achieved that in the software industry through real-time connectivity and the IT parks and where the professionals could stay. So we succeeded. But we do not create first-rate infrastructure which is comparable to any of the industrial zones of Southeast Asia. And that has to be done by private money. The second is we need a competitive exchange rate. Because if you have a 19% appreciation real exchange rate, it's lowering of import duties by 19%, which means negative import duty in some areas. And the third, and that is the most important part of the building block, which we don't pay any attention to, is the worker. Because if the worker is not housed near his workplace, he struggles to reach his factory in 1 hour, he needs a cup of tea to get going. There's no way he can compete on the same machine with a worker in Vietnam. And the whole Chinese success story was creating workers, dormitories, housing in their special zones starting with the 90s. Now today, all our industrial parks have land with very good rates for the industrialists. But where is the worker and where is he going to come and stay and work? So if we want to attract investment for global supply chains, we have to create workers' housing, and we have also to spend public money to train that worker. Because if I am a supplier to Walmart, I won't come to India and try to struggle finding labor and try and train him and retain him. So if I get a trained workforce which is good at, garmenting, then I will come. But if I will be struggling for 1 year to find this worker or negotiate wages with him, then the disincentive is there. And the final thing which a private entrepreneur has done in the Brandeis Apparel SEZ in Andhra is that he actually created a shed, put in the machines, and tried to get a Chinese supplier to come and try it out in India. So he gave him the shed with the machines and said, here it is, you try it out, if it's cheaper, you make money, come. And he made money and came. So that's what is the real concept of plug and play, and that we haven't tried at all. So unless we do some things very fundamentally different, our chances of getting the global supply chain out of China and India would be more modest. And giving just land is not enough.
Mr. Jha, CII conducted a snap poll recently where they found that a significant majority, of course, expect revenues to fall sharply, but they also expect a huge delay in economic recovery. What do you think is going on with the government at this point? I mean, there mustn't be a lack of intent. One shouldn't believe that. It's not like there's not information available on what the situation is on the ground. What do you think is causing this hamstringing and this delay in putting out injected, focused economic measures?
I can't speculate on this, Mithali. All I can say is that I think one of our problems has been that we have been more completely and thoroughly indoctrinated with neoliberal economics, which is, control the price levels and then automatically rules will take place, which it doesn't take place, in fact. But this kind of idea, and therefore keep interest rates high, therefore do not spend. Anathema is any Keynesian economics, any Keynesian solution is absolute anathema to these people. And most of the people who are controlling the economy in this country now are people who actually have picked up a bit of economics on the way while they were in the IAS or somewhere else. The last set of governors of the Reserve Bank have all been like this. Rajan was an exception, but Rajan actually was worse than the others because he was an absolute ardent monetarist. And he actually created some of the theories, right or wrong. Not the place to discuss that, which in fact other RBI governors are quoting even today. Monetarism has been a disaster for India, and I think that that is one reason. If we cannot get out of that mindset, and if a natural disaster of this size, which will wreck your economy, and I must say one thing, Mithali, even those who say that we have a very slow, gradual recovery are optimists. There may be no recovery at all. We have only begun to see the crash in revenues of the government. We've only begun to see the crash in foreign exchange earnings and remittances. We've only begun to see the people who are now without jobs, the 114 million, are living off their relatives or living off little savings they have. The 50 million people who are the employers in the micro and small and medium-sized industries, they are also living on savings. If they're doing anything at all, those savings will be exhausted very soon. And one day, they'll be absolutely without money. They will be unable to start anything. They won't have food to eat. Revenues will not be there. You think that the GDP is going to drop by 6 or 8%? Forget it. If we were to go on like this, if we don't pull out very fast with a sharp stimulus, and I really mean a sharp stimulus, I'm talking about something like 11 to 12, I've got some figures somewhere, but forget it. Let's say about 6 to 7% of the GDP. It would be about I think it was 12 lakh crores. Is that right? 10 to 12 lakh crores. We're not going to get out of this. And don't forget that this money being spent is not inflationary. It is actually preventing a collapse of demand, which is preventing deflation. You could call it any kind of money at all. It is reflationary. It is keeping the balloon tight instead of allowing it just fall. Air goes out and the balloon just becomes nothing. That's where we are heading.
We're almost out of time. So final word from you, Mr. Shankar. These are very worrying words that we just heard, but would you echo those fears? Do you think there is a chance we launch ourselves back so many years into the 70s where it's difficult to make our way back?
No, I think good sense will and should prevail, and we should be able to try and get out of the slowdown, but two sort of short points. One is that if we do nothing, there is also a real likelihood of high inflation rather than if we do something. Because if the economy doesn't go back on track, if the supply chains are not restored, then many items which people like us consume will come into short supply and we'll see high inflation. And even people with lower incomes. So I think that dimension is not adequately talked about. The other is that if we spend government money in creating demand in the rural part of India, because there is no lockdown effect today. So if I triple the pace of expenditure in rural roads, I can do it today, and the contracts can be awarded within weeks, and I can create jobs. If I accelerate the pace of the water economy, the large projects, the small projects, etc., etc. If I decide to line all the canals and increase the water availability, or I do solar panels in every village and go in for a feed-in tariff and vigorously implement the Kusum scheme of replacing the old inefficient water pumps with the efficient ones and solar panels. So these are all areas of expenditure where we will generate demand, and this is where government money would be well spent. So the way to think about it is, where do I spend money where I see demand in 3 months or 6 months? And in the rural economy preferably, because we don't know when the lockdown in the urban area. And secondly, where do I give guarantees to banks so that they are forced to lend, or I use my ownership of the banks and treat them as government departments and push them into lending where demand will get generated. So like as I said, all the incomplete housing projects, you just take them over, complete all the flats, forget about returns, NPAs, and once the economy is back, you take a call as to whether you need to write off maybe a few thousand crores or 1.5, 2 lakh crores, or you may not need to write off anything. Who knows? So different way of thinking and different way of acting. Two objectives: get the economy, supply chains going, inject enough liquidity for that purpose, spend government money to generate demand in the next 2 quarters in the rural economy, where today there is no constraint on doing any work. The construction has been fully opened up.
One additional point, Mithali.
Yes, Mr. Shah.
Transport links. If you do it, if you do this in the rural areas, you will need to restore transport links even more completely than you are doing today. You have no transport links. That's one of the reasons why nobody is following. Another thing is, talking about transport links, you can't have a system of fighting COVID where a zone is green one day, orange the next day, and red the third day, because there are these 50 million MSMEs are feeding into medium-sized companies, which are feeding in as component and material suppliers to large companies. And those links, if any of them are broken, then the large companies cannot guarantee that they'll be able to live up to their commitments, export commitments particularly, but also domestic commitments. The Maruti chief, Mr. Bhargav, he said this recently. He said, I need 1 month to start up because I need to know which of my suppliers are not in red zones. But the question is, all right, you can do that. But then suppose some of the people who are in orange zones or even green zones today are then transferred to red zones tomorrow. And you've got to deliver X number of cars to ship to Sri Lanka or wherever within 2 weeks. What are you going to do? Uncertainty will actually destroy your economy.
All very fair points and very worrying points indeed. One hopes that those in power are listening, including the Chief Economic Advisor. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining in today.